here we go. Hello, everyone. Thank you for bearing with me with some of my our technological issues. Welcome to the Wells College Visiting Writers Series, which has gone virtual this semester. Right off the bat, I want to just note that this reading, like all of our events, is made possible in part by the New York State Council for the Arts, whose generous support allows us to host events like these, and we're very grateful for their ongoing support. I am Dan Rosenberg, the director of the Visiting Writers Series, and I'm very excited to be hosting tonight's event. Here's how it's going to work. I will introduce Lauren Shapiro, our reader, who's going to read from her most recent book, Arena, as well as some new work. If at any point during the reading you are moved to ask a question, to make a comment, to cheer a specific moment, whatever it is, please feel free to do so in the chat over here. And then at natural breaks, maybe between the Arena section and the other work, I can jump in and pose your questions to Lauren, who will have a chance to answer them. And in that way, and also if there's time at the end, we can move to a more traditional Q&A as well. That way, let me just see here, make sure that I have everything that I need. We are in good shape. I am going to currently put two things in the chat right now, two links, and I'll repeat these at the end. The first is how to order Lauren's book directly from the publisher. And the second is if you would like a signed copy from her local independent bookstore, you could go to White Whale Books there, which would be a lovely alternate choice as well. So those are in the chat now. My big admonition to you all right now is to feel free to be chatting in that space. It's part of what makes these events feel live and dynamic rather than just a distant performance. And that distinction is going to actually be my segue to my introduction of Lauren Shapiro and her work. Because Lauren is a poet who thinks deeply about that kind of distance, that kind of performance, and the honesty or lack thereof associated with it. When I think about what makes this book distinctive, there's some easy and obvious initial answers. The first is that she uses photographs in this collection, but the photographs are casual, they're intimate, they're a little bit messy, they're more like snapshots than professional work. And because of that, they're showing the world, but they're also showing the fingerprints of the person doing that showing. And that's one of the distinguishing features of not just the images in this book, but the poems themselves. This book, which is so grounded in grief, in processing the trauma of a father's attempted suicide, always implicates and embodies the speaker as well. So for example, there's a poem called Silver Hill, which is named after a psychiatric hospital, and it ends, "No one knows how to leave." Not just the patient, but the visitor, the speaker of the poem, doesn't have an exit. And what's great about this poem and this book, one of the things that's great about them, is that they refuse to reduce the speaker to a roving eyeball, observing trauma and its consequences. The body saying these poems is always there, alongside its subjects and alongside us, the readers. That may sound heavy, and it is, but the final note that I want to celebrate in Lauren Shapiro's work here, in my effort to sort of frame this project for you, is that she's funny. In this book, there's humor. The humor is dark at times, but it's there, adding that other layer of experience that we broken humans all have, right? Where we have to stifle a laugh at the funeral when we see the toilet paper stuck to Uncle Peter's shoe, right? We feel that surge of delight rising up in the middle of our sadness. It's not a contradiction, but a complication of those real feelings. It's not a contradiction, this messy lived experience and these messy, playful, sad, loving, angry poems. They're just a complication. Lauren Shapiro is the author of Easy Math, which won the Kathryn A. Morton Prize and the Debut-litzer Prize for poetry, as well as Arena and a chapbook of poems, Yo-Yo Logic. She co-edited the new Census, an anthology of contemporary American poetry. Shapiro has translated creative work from Spanish, Italian, Vietnamese, and Arabic into English, and she is an associate professor of English at Carnegie Mellon University. Lauren, please take it away and welcome.
Thank you so much, Dan, and thanks for having me. Thanks to Wells College for having me, and thanks to everyone for listening. Zoom is great because you can sort of like do whatever you want while you're listening to a reading like this. Although I will say that I am going to be sharing images for the portion of the reading that is going to involve my book Arena. So if you're able to look, that would be helpful. And if you're able to select speaker view on your Zoom, that would also probably be ideal. And that way you can get the full experience. So I'll start there. Cenotaph. There is a reliquary on a ledge outside the bathroom. No one really knows why. I mean, that was the winter my father tried to kill himself. I was getting a haircut when I received the call. Then I kept receiving it forever. I was talking about the Christmas preparations at the time, debating the kinds of lights to get or something. It must have been a muddy time, said someone. Actually, it was terrifying. Later, the doctor told us it was impossible to tell what anything meant, though he didn't use those words. Someone used the metaphor of the iceberg, you know, what's showing and what's not. Someone else mentioned black holes. None of it made sense, but I guess they were nice gestures. I mean, at least they were trying. Someone still had to buy groceries and shovel the snow and all that. Then my father cashed out the savings account and gave us each a check. I kept trying to piece together events as though the questions could be answered logically. Then I realized I had all the wrong questions. Someone strung yellow tape to the driver's side door of the car. No one knew who had brought flowers. Some actions are more meaningful, like leaving a note. Then I remembered the baby. Oh no, where was the baby? Arena. To imagine your world encircled is to imagine it finite, a spectacle. The best place for a goring is the center of the storm, where everything is still, like a microscope the doctors pore over, probing. When the crowd quiets, it's to see the decapitation, or just to breathe in, not me. How insular, I mean lucky, to be sitting in the arena. To be outside the center, the show must go on and on. If you close your eyes, it goes on. Later, you could mention what you hear, how the only reason you know it's over is the sudden and incredibly loud cheers. Arena. A shirt and shoes are required, your signature on the dotted line, your fingerprints, license plate, the reason you came here in the first place, what you saw in the arena, whose blood, do you know whose blood is all over the fucking promenade? Did you come here to see someone die, to get a jolt, eat cotton candy and popcorn, hear the symphony eulogize him? Is that pig's blood? Was the sacrifice human? Was it a spectacle you wanted, a show with all the bells and whistles, Las Vegas and lights? Were you expecting Mariah Carey? Were you waiting for the signal to applaud? Was your response pre-recorded? We ask that you wear only dark colors out of respect, no low-cut blouses or short shorts, and try not to be the idiot who brings a boombox or drone, who posts to Instagram. Remember that this festival is also a funeral. The memory is like wool, like the toy llama made from real llama fur. That's the kind of appropriation I feel when I write about you. It's a secret about a secret, a lie about a lie. You have to open 1,000 doors and enter the endless maze to see it. The photo of the dog dying on the porch, the candy inside the candy. I would like to extract a melody from the memory, not unlike a beach inside a beach. There's no water anywhere at this beach. It's actually a desert. You have to use your imagination. I'm sipping a pina colada made of a pine cone. The cars going by make ruinous tracks. In my daydream, the noise is consistent. I've seen it on TV, on the infomercial for a bubble that never popped. Can we get it? Can we get it? Pleads my son from inside the poppable bubble in which we live. Patience, patient. Once I was driving for a long time by myself, tediously, as people do when they have to get between two distant points in a country that thinks it is not at war. And I was listening to a radio show about how little compassion Americans seem to have for each other, how silent and insular they become before erupting in a firework of bullets. President Obama said, "I don't think we have a monopoly on crazy people." The woman said she was trying to make a point by banging the loaded shotgun on the floor before blowing off her own jaw. Of course, we must think about the deer population and terrorists in the wilderness next door, as well as the stupidity of most people trying to make a point about rights, etc. Then the show ended and some classical music came on, which reminded me how long some things can endure. For example, a sonata written before radio or this country really existed, how we still find it beautiful. I considered how I could have this thought alone in Ohio, the blank highway, a pointless connection between two extremes. Then I paid the toll and drove on. Unspoken bond. He gave me his grandmother's emerald engagement earrings and said, "Don't tell my mother." I gave him my grandfather's ancient Roman coin and said, "Don't tell my father." Then he gave me his father's war medal, and I gave him my mother's Olympic trials trophy, and he gave me his mother's Chanel suit, and I gave him my father's gold cufflinks, and then we each stole cash from our parents and threw it at each other in handfuls like leaves, and greedily picked it all up and laughed and threw it again, this time with feeling, and we kissed and kissed and kissed and kissed like that forever. 10,000 dads. We have 10,000 dads. You're so lucky, say all our friends. You're so complicated, say all our therapists. Your mom must be so hot, say all the sleazebags. But sometimes it's hard. Having 10,000 homes and 10,000 toothbrushes is tricky. The holidays are rough, and remembering every dad's birthday is impossible. Saying good morning takes all day. Life is a constant fight for attention. They beg and plead with us to have a meal with them or hit around some baseballs. They follow us religiously on Instagram and like all our posts. They have such good hearts, the 10,000 dads. But how well do we really know any of them? Supreme Court rules against women's contraception coverage. Is that a shark? No, it's a wave. Is that a lizard? No, it's a stick. Is that a dead mermaid floating on a brick of gold? Yes, that is a dead mermaid floating on a brick of gold. Better bury her. A baby and her mother are one. Some days I killed you, others I let you suffer in a dark corner. I was a cold stone in the corner, and you were the golden bird flying over with the world's blessings. I amassed the miniature holiday decorations that sent a paltry glow over your distant belly. I was just a mother, and you were the most popular toy this holiday season. You made a variety of noises when a button was pushed and came with different moods. By watching you, others could learn to express themselves more eloquently. Once I had an urge to throw you from the window of a high-rise and follow you down. Once I had an urge to sleep forever in the dark woods of your discontent. But now I run after the harried threads you trail from your fingers like fairy dust. I pick up the rosebuds you leave lying in your soiled clothes. We are blossoming into new people. We are aging in a meaningful way. The kiss. I would like to kiss you, said the man perched on the chimney, but I don't have any lips. From my spot on the roof, I told him I was married, but that if he didn't have lips, it would be okay. He came near and touched me softly on my cheek with his cheek, and I knew that he really did have lips, but was being kind because he could tell that I was blind and lonely, sitting on a roof in winter, and he wanted to bring me back inside. So now I'm gonna transition a little bit to some newer poems. And I'm gonna check out the chat as I do so and sort of see if there are questions in here. Okay.
I can jump in. It's mostly
Okay.
commentary, but I wonder, Caroline Mannering just noted, God, I love when anger has fun, which I think popped in straight around the poem entitled Supreme Court Rules Against Women's Contraception Coverage. And it is a really, Caroline's giving me the thumbs up of correctly identifying the motivation of that for that comment. Could you maybe tell us a bit about like that poem in particular? It's a very small poem on the page with, I think, the longest title in the book, and the title tags it to a very specific real world moment, and yet the poem itself doesn't overtly address that moment.
Yeah, I wanted to write a poem about utter shock and dismay and anger. And honestly, I could probably retitle that poem any number of other things at this point, right? I mean, the year has been such a garbage dump in so many ways, more than this year, many years, I guess, have been. But that's the thing about that kind of poem, is that really it could have any number of titles. It's about the feeling that comes with that frustration and anger. And I wanted to show it sort of the improbability of it, right? Like just the shock of the improbable nature of this thing that had happened that I never thought would. And I guess that's what I was going for.
Great.
Okay, so I'll feel free to type any questions into chat about Arena or about, I'm just gonna read a few more recent poems. And I'm not gonna share, I'm only gonna share one page here because it's sort of a visual poem. So let me just organize it here. Just looks like scribbles right now, huh? So I've been writing a lot about language and about time. I'll read this one. Come here to my restaurant. My daughter's scribbles try to be letters, how language pulls from a depth of want. She makes up fancy names for dishes on her menu. Rocky Badaki, that resist, Hebi Badabi, spelling, Fifi Fafufu, they rhyme, Mimi Badudu, which is a way to sound real. They have many syllables, which is a way to sound expensive. She goes from talking to singing. In her voice and understanding, a cadence changes meaning. These are the rules in English. You don't have to be literate to know. I think because of quarantine, like my family is entering more and more my poems. I was telling Dan's class earlier today that before quarantine and COVID, I would sometimes go to this library in my town of Pittsburgh and Squirrel Hill because it had these big, beautiful windows and I could sit and look out while I was writing. And then I started to realize that the yoga studio was entering a lot of my poems because it was the thing that I was seeing right out the window. So I think it's true that your surroundings impact your writing. So when you're stuck with your kids for a year, it definitely enters. So I'll just read a few more here. Temporal. As I wrote a very sad poem, my daughter sat next to me, also writing a very sad poem. Hers was made of scribbles, but I could see the sadness in the jerks of the pen on the page, in the flourishes at the ends of each line. Oh, Mama, she said, this is the saddest poem I've ever written. I'm sorry, I said. This is also the saddest poem I've ever written. It's so sad that I had to write it in French, and I don't even speak French. We sighed. These poems are so sad, they don't even make sense, she said, which was when I realized my daughter was no longer child. As I turned to look at her, she was already sprouting the beautiful petals of an exotic flower with only a few short days to live. And then I'm just gonna read an excerpt from a longer piece. I know when you hear that, you're like, oh God, how long? It's composed of short little prose poems. So it's not that long, but I'm just gonna read a short selection from it. And I'll take questions too after that. It's called Brid. I watch nature's slow pace against the quickening tempo of Instagram and Twitter. Twin doors I open in the expanse. People throw flashlights and photographs like shouts in the forest. This is the spot where we can hear an echo, says my son, pausing on our walk, and we talk out loud to ourselves for a while. For spa day, we scrub our feet with pebbly salves, play the sounds of the rainforest on low, blue toenails this time, says my son. I plug in the hair straightener and get the towels. We perform in front of the picture windows in the living room, acting out our adventure. And each house its own intimacy, like stones on a beach, waiting for the tide. We play Slamwich and Labyrinth. We play Doodle Dice and Old Maid. Someone is left out at the end. There's a tired ladle in the winter sandbox. My daughter and I have a conversation entirely in nonsense language, using exaggerated inflections and facial gestures. Repetition, a kind of low hum, a humor in opacity. The neighbors embrace the holidays, put up elaborate decorations and lights. We carve jack-o'-lanterns and make a haunted house out of dollar store black tablecloths. When it passes, we invent our own holidays, a Stuffy's birthday, Leaf Day. We celebrate the leaves in our lives, something we should have been doing all along. The New York Times prints a full-page spread of headshots of the deceased, but it backfires. They printed all the old people, says my husband. It looks like only the old are dying. This isn't a marketing scheme, I think, but somehow it is. My daughter jumps out of a doorway yelling, boo! I freeze. You're supposed to say, ah, she chastises. The expectation of surprise, a guttural sound tied to motion, fear. When my students write onomatopoeia into their poems, it falls flat, a sound without a body. Large chunks of snow drop from trees. A bird dives. The word bird, a mistaken spelling of the original Brid. Mistakes channel a worldview, a tear in a web that becomes an ocular hole, a tunnel into new brightness. The map of Pennsylvania counties is marked in shaded oranges and reds by case count. In high school, I painted a portrait of my father in that palette without realizing its anger. Suggestion like a flip book, missing pages. Once a person could feel fear by feeling eerie. Now it just describes a thing, an uncertainty. More milk, paper, tape. I make the same list again. My daughter confuses lasagna with vagina. What are we eating? She asks. uncertain? Her lack of knowledge of time. What day is it? How many more days are there? Until what? I ask. Hush, the algorithm of social media advertisements, an indictment that I would look at such dresses online. Time a wasted space of another dimension, the clutter building in the house like sediment. Push open language's door, an unexpected draft. My son shows me his newest Minecraft build, trap doors that lead to lava, an opening that drops intruders into the void. Booby trap, a silly word, like nincompoop. A portmanteau, its serious French sound from the word for a simple piece of luggage. Drag all those sounds around with you. The children's blocks have magnets these days. My daughter asks for sand sanitizer. The words stick, a family joke. We agree it sounds better that way. It's not letting me in, says my daughter. What isn't? The screen. We buy bird feeders that attract goldfinches and orioles, hummingbirds, and woodpeckers. Our 13-year-old dog gets sick. The vet shakes her head over the phone. Memories like filters bring clean images. The dog park in winter, a puppy lying on the heat vent. Grief like a bucket of hot water we have to carry around with us. I know Santa has the elves, but do you think the Easter Bunny steals gifts? My daughter asks. No, she magics them, I answer. Then why does Santa need elves? Logic drilling holes into imagination, a sieve held beneath the finished pasta draining. I don't know. An expanse waiting for puncture. How a word changes, opens up. Cut the tethers and watch meaning escape, the letters forcing a mouth to shape itself newly. Children are malleable, haven't set themselves on a singular path. My daughter makes sculpture after sculpture out of clay, an army of Gothic flowers. I'm almost there, guys. When this is all over, I'm going to kiss everyone, someone writes on Twitter. Nostalgia like returning to a favorite childhood aquarium, only they've changed all the exhibits. The specialty store sells obscure candy. You can tell by the font on the packaging. How many days are there again? Asks my daughter. Until what? I ask. Until the next leaf day. What is real as what can be seen? So much visible through screens, but still an uncertainty. Are wolves real? My daughter asks, lying in bed. Yes. Are bats real? Yes. She closes her eyes, puts her hands over them. Okay, please tell me the truth. Are werewolves real? When my son was little, he thought the end of the calendar meant the end of the world. No, I reassure him, we just get a new calendar. And what about the next year, he asks. We get another one, I say happily. And then we die, he says. Quarantine stretches its languid body. Why did someone have to go and eat a bat, my son asks. That's not quite right, I say. It's more an outcome of our actions than a single mistake. Then why are we destroying the earth, he wants to know. I don't know, because it lets us lead these lives we're used to, because we won't look far enough ahead? No, he says, I mean, why are we, this family, destroying the earth? Lack of action as a deep mistake. How to start a new way of living completely. When this is all over, a kind of ignorance. Take the opportunity. How many more days are there, says my daughter. Meaning made through circumstance. The real reason is, I don't know. Wishing something away, a magical evasion, how to face the real and change it. A responsibility tethered to something outside a worldview. Push through the screen, pull it out, a muddy mass. Believing isn't just seeing. It takes imagination to understand the real. I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren. That was great. It was lovely to see people responding. I think I'll join with Michelle saying, keep going, right? There's no apologize. Those are wonderful. And you said this is a series of prose poems, right?
Yeah.
The prose form, this is something we talked about with my poetry class. And I'm gonna just start a question here, but if folks want to add to the chat, or if you would like to use the raise hand feature, I'd be happy to sort of unmute you and invite you to voice your own question if you'd prefer, whatever works for you. But Lauren, when we were talking in my class earlier today, you were talking about how the prose form in particular, combined with the lack of punctuation that you used in that form in Arena, was aiming toward a kind of like overwhelmingness, right? An effort to create a frantic kind of voice and a kind of oppression without the white space that lineation affords. But these didn't sound like, this seemed to be prose operating in a very different register. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about like what the prose form is doing here for you.
I mean, as probably most writers feel, I'm really glad to be done with Arena. I'm glad to be moving on to another project. I mean, which is not to say that I don't value it, but I'm in a very different headspace now, than I was when I was writing that. And the material that I'm interested in looking at is just tonally really different. I think in Arena, I was trying to write about panic and fear and claustrophobia and grief, and really kind of difficult, dark emotions that require kind of a speed and an insistency. And here I'm more, as anyone who's been in quarantine, I guess we all are, know, time takes on a new meaning. I mean, things are different. Like there is no end. It just keeps going. Right? like we're confronted with our mortality even more because we realize like the meaning of time or something. And especially if you have children, it just goes on and on. So I just was interested in a more meditative kind of approach and a lighter approach. So I think, especially with the standard sentences and punctuation, it just has that lighter kind of prose-like feel to it, which is what I was looking for. And I see a question in here from James. Your poems with corresponding pictures don't feel like traditional ekphrastic poems where the image is described and interpreted. Instead, they feel more akin to haiga, the image and poem informing each other. Yes. Can you talk about how you hope readers will respond to or think about your combinations of poem and image? Absolutely. I wanted images in the book for several reasons. I just said, that I was attempting to write about panic and fear and emotions that are, I think, really felt almost immediately in the body when we have them. They're hard to write because writing takes a long time and reading takes a long time. So if you read a whole poem, that's like a slow endeavor, even if you write the poem to be read fast, whereas an image can kind of immediately affect you, right? It can immediately shock you. And the way I wanted to use the images was to create that kind of immediate sensation, but I wanted it to play off of the poems and kind of emphasize and add to them. I wasn't interested in illustrating the poems. I don't really know that, at least for me, poems don't really need to be illustrated, or good ones don't. And so I wanted them to add another dimension or another feeling to create some sort of cognitive dissonance maybe, or tension, additional tension. But I was talking to Dan's class today and I was saying that, I wish that I had spent a little bit more time adding more images to the book after the fact when I started doing these readings and thinking about Zoom and wanting to make it a little bit more interesting and put some of these images up. I started playing around and mixing images from the book with different poems from the book, not the ones that are next to them, or taking images that are not in the book and putting them in the presentation. So I think, there are many different ways that they can interact together, and hopefully, create some interesting reactions and sensations. But yeah, I agree. I want them to inform each other and build off each other as opposed to like illustrate or, just say what the poem is saying.
Can I maybe follow up on that question by asking about, like, if you could share some of where these images came from, like how you chose, how you created these images?
I took all the photos on my phone. I mean, and they're all just like snapshots from a phone. I went to some events that I would, don't really usually go to, like baseball games, and I went to a Metallica concert by myself, and I felt, like a 40-year-old going to a Metallica concert by herself, but it was okay. I got some photos out of it. It was an experience. And others are just snapshots from different moments. I tried to find fire wherever I could. For some reason, that was like something I was drawn to. So like, I didn't put the bonfire in this particular presentation, but fireworks and kind of explosions and that kind of thing. Yeah.
That's great. I also was wondering, thinking about the new work as well as Arena, and how this is obviously poetry. It's not nonfiction or anything like that, but your family appears in the new work in really and in Arena in sort of explicit ways. And as someone who, I feel deeply what you were saying about being surrounded by your kids all the time means that the kids end up in the poems all the time. That's been very much a part of my recent experience as well. And I find myself thinking about some of the complexity of that, even the ethical complexity of that. Like, my kid appears in so many of my poems, and he doesn't really have a say in that yet. He's 6 and doesn't understand, like he couldn't give informed consent or withhold it, right? Like he's not really capable of making that choice about what I do with his language or his part of our shared story. And I was wondering if you've like your children appear in that long sequence of prose poems that you just read, right? Like, have you had those conversations, or sort of have those concerns colored your use of their contribution to the sort of language that surrounds you at all?
I think I feel more strange about including like adults that I know in my poems. Like I did, tell my family about Arena before it was published, and offer to show it to them. But ultimately, the work is the work. I mean, I'm not gonna change a poem because someone doesn't want to be seen that way. I mean, that is what it is. At least I can say to myself that I'm not, a dance mom or something. Like, I'm not trotting them out, and doing their makeup and making them jump through hoops. I'm just recording elements of childhood.
That seems fair. That's yeah, it's a funny thing, because like so much of some of those bursts of delight, just even looking back at the chat for the sequence of prose poems, right? Like Kevin offering up sand sanitizer for the win, and what are we eating? The thing that Amy Shapiro is laughing at, right? Are these moments where children will offer these twists to language that are just delightful, right? They're just one of the joys of being around kids, is hearing them have that new relationship to language. And I think there is something, and I mean this as an absolute compliment, there is something childlike in a lot of your poems, where they will approach something that has been maybe pre-digested through other thinkers with a new sense of like wonder and linguistic sort of exploration. And I'm thinking even like the poem that Caroline was noting as well, Supreme Court rules against women's contraception coverage, just offers a very childlike call and response. And I think, like, is there something, I'm doing that thing where I'm not asking you a question, I'm just observing things about your poems, and I apologize for that, but I'm just struck by the simplicity of some of the language that belies the complexity of the thinking, which I think is evident in both when children speak and in some of your work. And is that, I guess the question is that something that you are consciously thinking about and moving toward, that combination of simplicity of utterance and surprise? Or is that a natural byproduct of just what attracts you?
I mean, I read poetry to be surprised. That's why I read it. I don't read it because I want to read a beautiful description of a vase. I mean, that's really why I read poetry. I read it because I want to read something new that's said in a new way. And I want to be surprised and I want to think about something. So for me, that's why I love poetry. That's what I love about it, is that it allows you to come at something from so many different angles. So do I try to look at something in a new way? I mean, I think it lets you like fly your freak flag, right? I mean, it lets you do whatever you want. I mean, you can say anything, right? We're not expecting anything in particular. So um, I guess that's what I love about poetry in general. I guess I don't know if that's a cop-out answer, but
I think it's a great answer. And it raises a sort of secondary question for me, which is, I know when we were talking in my class earlier, you mentioned like one of the ways that you sort of knew that Arena was done is that you were just sick of it, right? Like you were done with that project. You wanted it to let you go so that you could do other sorts of things, right? And move on to different, different sorts of work. And I wonder if have you seen a sort of trajectory in your own poetics over time? I know that we met in grad school. And I know you were writing a very different type of poem before then and have since sort of evolved. I wonder if you could maybe talk about your evolution a little bit.
talk about my evolution. Sure, Dan.
You
Why
just
not?
sounded like you knew exactly what I was saying. And I talked about how you've changed. Like, could you give us the trajectory?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I was writing really funny, absurd poems first, I guess. And my first book is really funny and absurd. And I think that I had a lot of fun with it. I enjoyed the zaniness of it. I was doing something that was different for me. But ultimately, afterwards, I felt like that I was sort of using maybe humor as a crutch or a way not to explore topics fully. And I wanted to, in Arena, there were some topics that I really wanted to explore. But I didn't want to just write like confessional, like diary poems, like for myself. I wanted to explore the individual feeling grief in the public eye. And that was something that was interesting intellectually to me. So I wanted to, that's what I wanted to do with that book. And it was really hard because I wanted to also have there be funny moments and lighter moments. Because I think even when we're experiencing a trauma or a grief, I was saying this earlier, we go through so many different emotions, right? I mean, you're not just always sad after a death. Like you have anger, you have moments of weird laughter. Like there's just a lot of emotional like planes that we live on. So to have a project only exist in one didn't make much sense. So Arena, I was working on like bringing in some of that absurdist kind of dark humor, but tempering it down a little bit, and seeing if I could make it work with more serious content. That was my goal. But the book took it took a lot out of me. It took a lot of time and energy and stress. And I'm really glad now to be going in a different way. I'm returning a little bit to working on some translation, some literary translation, and I'm thinking more about language as my daughter is learning to read, and as the world has gone sort of quiet in a way, I think, with quarantine. So that's what I'm working on now. I'm working on writing that explores time and language and expectations and growth. And it's quieter, I guess.
Is this new project, is it a new project or are you just writing poems? Like where are you, like does this next work hang together yet? Or is that how you approach writing? Do you think about it project based? Like what are you up?
Yeah, I start by writing poems and then I see if a project is coalescing. So I wrote Brid, which is right now like a 30-page like prose poem, like 2 prose poems a page, 30-page piece. And that's like I think a center section maybe of a book. And now I'm writing the book around it, kind of, I think. Or maybe I'm just writing poems. I guess I'm still figuring it out.
Yeah. Because I know that you've said elsewhere for Arena that you had this sort of critical mass, this sense of the shape of the book, and then you knew you needed to write into some of the holes in that shape, right?
Yeah, Arena, I had like 140 pages of poems, and there were too many sad poems and there were too many angry poems. So I had to like cut a bunch of those that sounded similar. And then then there were poems that were like too funny and lighthearted, you know. So it was like a tonal thing I had to figure out. And then I wanted to figure out a way to tie it all together. So I used the Arena poems and the photographs to kind of ground the collection. Um, I sort of look at poetry collections as not as poems that kind of work in a wave-like formation. I sort of think of a wave when I put together a manuscript. Like I'll start off in one point and I'll look at the next poem. Does the next poem move or take me somewhere else? And does the transition work? And then I'll do that with the next poem. So I sort of follow it through like that. But I don't know. I think, you know, each project is different. And I think any good artist of any kind wants to grow and change and do new things. Who wants to stay doing the same thing all the time? I guess if you want to make money and you do something and it makes a lot of money, then people do that again and again. But you know, there's no money in poetry. So
Yeah,
yeah.
we're freed from those economic concerns. I think it's Auden in his essay, Yeats as an example, who talks about how like great poets reinvent themselves and flirt with failure. And it's the poets who don't strive for that sort of excellence who end up just devolving into a kind of self-parody. I'm with you on the investment in trying a new thing for sure. Stephen Furlong offers up, as is his wont, a quote from Natasha Trethewey here. It says, "I talk about the elegant envelope of form that a poem is, the way that you are shaping the language, which requires a kind of distance and restraint. I make use of silence as much as I make use of revelation, revealing things." I think Stephen was thinking about that in response to what you were saying about the like relative quietness that you're finding now. It's
Yeah,
lovely.
white space is so important. I mean, you know, like if you're an artist, you have to think about, you know, negative space. So we need the space. We need the space within the poem, and that's what a poem is. It's language that also has space in it, I think, right? That doesn't just exist in a block. So I think part of that space is meant for thought, you know, and you can't have a revelation if you don't have time to think about nothing first, I think. I say this to my students because they're all overworked and they're taking too many classes. And I remember when I was in college and I had all this free time, it felt like, between classes, and you need to have that. You need to take time to do nothing in order to like come to realizations and have those moments. So I encourage that whenever you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's wonderful. Do we have any other sort of questions in the chat? Folks are available to jump in here. Yeah, the availability of free time and having to push against the constant desire to just inundate yourself with more information. I think about when I moved from Manhattan to Iowa, it was a movement that allowed me to write because there was just nothing happening in Iowa, right? So I couldn't be distracted in a way that like I vividly had this experience of like, I'm in my apartment in New York and I can sit here and work on this garbage poem that's probably still going to be garbage when I'm done with it. Or I can go to Cooper Union and hear Susan Sontag like read and talk and be brilliant. And I would make the choice for Sontag every time. And that meant I was never just sitting in my apartment working. And I think that was one of the appeals of moving to the middle of corn country, was this idea of like, oh, now those wonderful, beautiful distractions will be gone. How
Yeah,
do
I didn't get anything done. I got nothing done in graduate school, but it prepared me to write the work that I wrote afterwards.
Hmm.
So for that, I thank it.
How do you carve out the time to write now? Like where and when do you actually do your writing? Are you regimented about it?
No, not at all. No, not at all. I put everything else first all the time. So, you know, I try to get up early and write in the morning sometimes. Before the kids are up and that kind of thing. Here and there, I'm not a night writer. I'm like more of a morning person. I think people have their different times of day more than anything. For me, it's the morning. I like to read fiction at night and poetry in the morning. That's my approach. And reading always helps. I can't really write if I don't read something, because I have to think, you know, before. You can't just, and that's why when students are like, oh, I'm looking at this blank piece of paper, I looked at it for 2 hours. And I'm like, why didn't you read for 2 hours? Idiot, you know, like, I mean, I wouldn't say that, but you know what I mean? Like, don't sit there looking at a blank piece of paper, read something, you know, do something else, like get out of your own head, you know? So I guess reading helps a lot. And coffee.
Coffee. Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is so lovely, Lauren. It's great to talk with you about these things. I'm going to put in the chat here again the links to buying Arena, which you can do directly from the publisher or through an independent bookstore here in not here in Pittsburgh. And I'll just sort of maybe close out our evening by thanking Lauren. Thank you once again for joining us, and thank you all for coming and for your questions and observations and enthusiasm in the chat. It's been really lovely to see your faces. And I'll just note to you that our next event is on March 24th, when Maria Devana Headley, who is the author of a bunch of acclaimed fiction and nonfiction, will read from her wild, funny, feminist version of Beowulf, actually. The link for that event and for all the other wonderful readings we have coming up. Shane McCrae is coming up right after that. Those are all available at wells.edu/visiting writers, or you can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/wells visiting writers. We are out and about. It's lovely to see you all. People in the chat are saying thank you, Lauren, and I will join them. And thank you all again for coming, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you, everyone.